Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, give up to the host, Lemon MMA.
Thank you, everybody. Well, ladies and gentlemen, 2025 for the UFC has come to a close. With the last UFC event happening last week, it leaves a lot to look back on now. We had some of the most insane finishes of 2025, some of the most insane fights this year, some of the most insane cards we have witnessed, and then on the flip side, we have had some of the worst fights of this year, some of the most abysmal and just disappointing cards this year as well, and of course, some of the worst fights as well. There is a lot to look at for this year of 2025 for the UFC. And what better way to do that than show a little montage that I cooked up. So, allow me to give you all a highlight of this year. Currents, are you guys gonna close? Come on. There you go. Come on. Let's keep going. Come on. Come on.
Well, he's already busted up. Oh! Out cold.
Oh my gosh! Just
deal with it.
right hand. Oh yeah, come out of the back of the elbows. Her deep in the distance. Oh my God! Oscar yet again. For Oscar's face. Oh, beautiful. Oh, that'll do it. For an expected crazy technique. Oh my goodness! Oh, he's getting out of hand. Face of pressure.
So much pressure.
Oh, spinning attack! No way!
Yeah, it's all the.
But they own a bakery. Nasty right for Dwellis Willie late. Play into the crowd. And new undisputed UFC welterweight champion of the world is
Yes, guys. Nice little video I made, but we don't care about that. Let's now go over to the categories for the UFC Oscars for 2025. Now, for the UFC Oscar of 2025, guys, instead of 11 categories this year, we have 10 categories. Starting with the first one, the best UFC event of 2025, the worst UFC event of 2025, the best UFC fight of 2025, the worst UFC fight of 2025, the worst UFC robbery of 2025, the best knockout of the year, the best submission of the year, the best performance from a UFC fighter in 2025, the best prospect of the year, and finally, the UFC fighter of the year. Alright, now that we have gone over all the categories for this year, let us now go to the nominations for our first category. Now, for the best UFC event of 2025, guys, we actually had some good nominations this year. I mean, we always do when there's always a good amount, but this year we actually had a really good selections because instead of 4 slots, we instead have 6 slots this year compared to last year, guys. I know, it's crazy. For the nominations for the best UFC event of 2025, I have UFC 311, Makhachev vs. Moicano, UFC 223, Merab vs. Yan 2, UFC Fight Night, Henry Cejudo vs. Song Yadong, UFC 317, Ilia Topuria vs. Charles Oliveira, UFC 314, Alexander Volkanovski vs. Diego Lopez, and finally, for the last nomination, UFC 320, Ankalaev vs. Pereira 2. Now, guys, each one of these nominations have a fair case for why they should be the best UFC event of 2025. UFC 311, you had Makhachev versus Moicano, a crazy, turnaround of what happened. Merab versus Umar, arguably one of the best title fights in this year. Same with 317, you have Ilia Topuria pulling off a crazy finish against Oliveira. And then you had arguably fight of the year, Joshua Van versus Brendan Royval. UFC 323, Merab Dvalishvili versus Yan. Yan finally getting the belt back in a crazy upset. All of these have very fair cases as to why each of them should win the category for the best UFC event of 2025. But for me, I believe that the winner of the best UFC event of 2025 is UFC 323 Dvalishvili versus Yan 2. When I first was thinking about this, I was thinking, is this recency bias because this was the last pay-per-view of the year? But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, nah, I don't think so. This card was unbelievably stacked. Like, we had so many finishes on the prelims. We had so many good fights. I can't think of one stinker on this entire card. The only issue with this card, Hooper may say, great. If you're a hardcore fan, you're going to love this card. If you're a casual, you're not really going to know who a lot of these people are besides Merab and Pantoja. And even then, Pantoja isn't really a big name. Merab just became a big name this year, but that's it. That's literally it. Not a single boring fight on this entire card, man. Now, for the worst UFC event of 2025, guys, I have 4 nominations for this one. There weren't really too many stinkers this year, but there were some that really stuck out and just had to be mentioned. For the first nomination, UFC 321 Aspinall versus Gone, UFC Fight Night Kamaru Usman versus Joaquin Buckley, UFC Fight Night Blanchfield versus Barber, quote unquote. And finally, UFC Fight Night, Josh Emmett versus Lamone Murphy. At first, I was very, confused on who it was gonna be. You know, in my opinion, there's really only 2 events that you could really have a fair case for which one's the worst. But in my opinion, the worst UFC event of 2025 has to go to UFC Fight Night Blanchfield versus Barber. The reason why this event is the worst of 2025 is very simple. The main event didn't even happen. No. At least Tom and Gon got to fight for a little bit. This fight didn't even happen. They literally canceled it a couple minutes before they were walking out. The main event turned out to be Gamrot versus Colleen. That was the main event. This fight didn't even happen. And the fact this wasn't an Apex, and the fact this card was just very weak already. I mean, Apex cards are already weak as they are, but this one was it was genuinely bad. Day and Weight Contender Series fights are better than this. Alright, let's talk about something more positive than something really stinky like UFC events. Let's talk about some of the best fights of 2025. And for this category, we have 6 nominations. Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van, Yuri Prohaska versus Jamal Hill, Nazim Salikov versus Nicholas Mota, Merab Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan 2, Mateusz Rebecki versus Chris Duncan, and finally, surprisingly, Bilal Muhammad versus JDM. Realistically, all these fights are amazing and they all have very fair cases. This year had some really good fights, but when it comes down to it, in my opinion, the best UFC fight of 2025 has to go to Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. I mean, I just couldn't give it to anybody else besides this one. Listen, Yuri Prohaska's 2 fights have fair cases. Chris Duncan versus Mateusz Rebecki has very fair case. By the way, that's a great fight. You all should watch that one. Absolutely disgusting and just brutal to watch. But when I think about what I'll remember as the best fight of 2025, I'm going to remember Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval, because you have to understand the context as well. Joshua Van took this fight on a 2 weeks notice or 3 weeks notice immediately after he just won a previous fight. He fought on the previous pay-per-view and finished the guy quite easily. Then he goes up there 3 weeks later to fight the #1 ranked guy in that division and beats him. It was nothing. Okay, it was competitive, but you get what I'm saying. This has to be the fight of the year, in my opinion. Now, unfortunately, while we had some of the best MMA fights ever this year, we also had some of the worst UFC fights ever. So let's just go through them. Torres Finney versus Robert Valente, Kennedy Nazajikus versus Marcus Pacheco, Hamdi Abdul-Lahab versus Chris Barnett, and finally, Amanda Lemos versus Lazim Lucandino. I will say, all these fights are terrible. We all know they're terrible. But when it comes to all these fights, in my opinion, the worst fight that we saw in 2025 has to go to Torres Finney versus Robert Valente. This was, you want to know what makes this fight so much more annoying and just terrible compared to the others? It was the fact that Torres Finney was actually a marketable guy. He actually had a funny personality. He was just his build was just so ridiculous. The fact that he's 5'9" and he has no neck essentially at middleweight, it was funny, you know? And then he goes out there in his debut and has the worst fight ever. I am pretty sure he threw in total 4 significant punches in a 3-rounder. This is easily the worst fight of 2025. We also have to talk about something else that doesn't get talked about enough. UFC robberies. Now, luckily this year we didn't actually have that many robberies when it came to major UFC fights, but there were still robberies. There were some notable ones that definitely caught in mind. And we have 4 nominations for the worst robberies of 2025. Those being Hamdi Abdulahab getting the win over Jamal Porkas, Nasrat getting the win over Esteban Rivovic, Marcin Tybura getting the win over Mick Parkin, and finally, Kalin Luren getting the win over Nathaniel Fletcher. Now, while all these UFC robberies have been terrible decisions, one of them comes out on top as the worst robbery of 2025. And your winner for the worst robbery of 2025 has to go to Hamdi Abdulahab versus Progres. There's not really much I can say about this one, you know, apart from the fact that Hamdi has been in 2 categories right now, and they have been not good signs for him at all, because both of them have been about the worst fights of this year and the worst robberies of this year. One of them he almost won, and the other one he did. So congratulations, Hamdi. Alright, now enough about the negatives. Let's talk about something very interesting. Knockouts of 2025. As you can see, we've increased it from 4 nominations to 6, because there's just been so many more knockouts this year that I just had to include more. So, let me introduce you the nominations. Quillet Skibbett KOing Nasrik at UFC 321. Mauricio Rufy KOing Bobby Green at UFC 313. Ilya Topuria flatline KOing Charles Oliveira at UFC 317. Lamone Murphy KOing Aaron Pico with a spinning back fist at UFC 319, Carlos Prates being the first person to ever finish Leon Edwards at UFC 320, and finally, Yojo Song KOing Jekka Sorung at UFC 317. You can see why I had to include 2 more spots for the nomination of Best Knockout of 2025. I mean, because look at all these. These are all some disgusting finishes. These photos just say it all that you need to know. I mean, just disgusting. And each one of them has a fair argument as to why they should be the best knockout of 2025. But, in my opinion, that spot has to go to Mauricio Rufy KOing Bobby Green at UFC 313. When I saw this knockout, I just knew this was going to be it. The way that this KO was delivered with him spinning, then doing a high kick, then Bobby Green just going out flat cold was just perfect in my opinion. So congratulations Mauricio Rufy for winning Best Knockout of the Year. Now what we also have to talk about, as well as the best knockouts of the year, we have to talk about the best submissions of the year. And for this, we only have 4 categories. There weren't too many insane submissions of the year, unfortunately, in 2025. But the ones that we did have were pretty interesting. Islam Makhachev submitting Renato Moicano at UFC 311. Murat being the first person to submit Sean O'Malley at UFC 316. All of Walter Walker's heel hook submissions. Yes, I am including all of them because they are all the same. I couldn't pick one. They all are the exact same because they're all heel hooks. And finally, Gene Silva submitting Bryce Mitchell at UFC 314. Now again, while there aren't as many submission nominations as compared to the knockouts, each one of these have very fair cases and are incredibly good as to why they should be the best submission of the year. However, what I believe was the best submission of 2025 has to go to Gene Silva submitting Bryce Mitchell at UFC 314. The reason why I believe this is the best submission of the year is because I don't think anybody was expecting Gene Silva to submit Bryce Mitchell. If anything, we were expecting Bryce Mitchell, if he was going to win this, it would have been by submission because Bryce Mitchell is a grappler. That's his bread and butter. But no, Gene Silva is the one that does it to him. That's what I felt got a lot of people to be very excited for this fight. Not to mention the build up to this fight was very intense. I'm not going to say it. That's not what this video is about. But congratulations, Gene Silva, for winning the best submission of 2025. Now, guys, what also made 2025 very interesting for us UFC fans were the very impressive performances by certain fighters this year that we didn't expect. And so I have 6 nominations for this category, and without further ado, let me announce the nominations. Yuri Prohaska with a comeback win against Khalil Roundtree, Joshua Van beating the #1 ranked guy at flyweight on a 2 to 3 weeks notice. Petr Yan avenging his loss against Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 223. Michael Morales going out there and knocking out the #1 ranked guy, Sean Brady, at UFC 222. Alex Pereira avenging his loss against Magomed Ankalaev in the rematch and getting the belt back at UFC 320. And finally, Diego Lopez knocking out Gene Silva in a bounce-back win. Each one of these are incredibly impressive for their own right. Alex Pereira avenging Magomed in a 1-minute stoppage, being his fastest finish in his title reign. Petr Yan avenging the loss against Merab Dvalishvili, ending Merab's winning streak, ending his title reign. Diego Lopez with a bounce-back win over Gene Silva after he got dominated by Volkanovski not too long ago. Each one of these have a fair argument as to why they should be the best performance of 2025. But for me, what I think of as the best performance of 2025, that fight has to go to Petr Yan avenging the loss against Merab Dvalishvili. This fight was some of the most insane technical performances I've ever seen from a fighter. I mean, the fact that, first of all, Yan lost the fight dominantly against Merab in their first fight. And so what does Yan do in response to that? He dominates Merab in the rematch. And not just that, he very much dominates him. He is able to stuff almost all the takedowns. In fact, he gets more takedowns on Merab than Merab does to him. He also is able to keep up the pace with Merab, unlike their first fight where he was just getting pressured so much. The fact that Yan in their first fight got dominated, and we all counted out Yan in this fight, but those that trusted Yan, he delivered tremendously and shocked everybody, stopping Merab from ending the year with the most title defenses ever. And for that, Petr Yan defeating Merab Dvalishvili, in my opinion, has earned him the best performance of 2025. Now guys, we are on to the second to last category for this year, and that is the best prospects of 2025. For this category, we have 6 nominations. A lot of good prospects this year. We had some very talented ones, and I'm ranging them from they just made their debut, they have a couple fights, or they just got ranked. So without further ado, let me announce them. Vinicius Oliveira, Kevin Vallejos, Alexandre Deporia, Altabar Gutierrez, Quinton Scaliob, and finally Luke Riley. Now when it comes to how you look at the best prospect of the year, to me, I believe that looking at who's the best prospect comes down to who is the most skilled, who has shown the most technique, who has shown to being the best opponent, and who has shown that they could potentially be a UFC champion. And for that, to me, who is the best prospect of 2025 has to go to Kevin Vallejos. The main reason I chose Kevin Vallejos as the best prospect of 2025 is because I believe he has the most potential of all these guys currently, and the fact that he is also very skilled, in my opinion. His moves and his technique and what he has shown in the octagon this early into his career is very impressive. Not to mention that he made his debut this year and now he's ranked. So congratulations for being the prospect of the year. Now, the final category that you all have been waiting for, the UFC 2025 Fighter of the Year. As always, this discussion is a very interesting topic, as you could name a lot of fighters who have earned the right to be the Fighter of 2025. For this year, we have 4 slots, same as last year, and I will not waste any more time in announcing the nominations. Merab Dvalishvili, Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, and finally Petr Yan. Now, each one of these fighters have had a tremendous year. Merab Dvalishvili being the most active champion in 2025. Islam Makhachev becoming the first double champion who was from lightweight to welterweight. Incredibly impressive. Ilia Topuria becoming a double champion as well and starching Oliveira out cold in the first round, reaching new heights that he has never seen, and the fact that we really haven't seen since McGregor. And finally, Petr Yan for the insane comeback that this man had, going from 0-3 not too long ago to now becoming 4-0 and getting the belt back against Merab Dvalishvili. Each one of them have a fair case why they should be the fighter of the year for what they did in 2025. But there can only be one person who is fighter of 2025. And for that, the winner of the fighter of the year of 2025 is Merab Dvalishvili. The reason that Merab is the fighter of 2025 is very similar to why Pereira was my winner for 2025's fighter of the year. He was active, he was dominant, he was very impressive of how he was winning the belt. The same thing is for Merab. While he's not finishing guys all the time, he dominates his opponents, he smudges them to outpace them, to make them get tired. He does his way of domination, different from Pereira, but it's still very dominant. And yes, while he did lose at the end of this year, the fact that it took him this amount of time to finally lose the belt, in which you could make an argument that maybe he shouldn't have fought a fourth time. He already secured himself, in my opinion, as a fighter of the year when he beat Corey Sandhagen. There was no point to fight for a fourth time, but he tried to dare to be great, and for that, despite him losing to Peter Yan at the end of this year, everything else that he has done in 2025, to me, still makes him the fighter of the year. And with that, guys, 2025 for the UFC has finally come to a close. I very much was worried that I was not going to get this done by the year. We are running it very close, guys, but I hope you all had a very good holiday Christmas. I hope you all spent a good time with your family for New Year's Eve, and I will see you all in the next video.